Hello. So welcome to Race Service Night School. Race Service is a cross-media creative agency, but one of our goals is to be connecting these worlds with our background in automotive and racing to other areas of design. And we're quite interested to see how we can look into the future and see what kind of role design is going to play in the future. There's a lot of pressure that we're all experiencing right now, if you look at the state of the planet, etc. So we're bringing in different types of thinkers, different creators, different designers to have discussions. Let's welcome Errolson Hugh to the stage.
Earlier this year, I did a small lecture at a place called House in Toronto. House is a sort of a somewhere across between a startup and a university that my friend Lamar and another friend of his, Abel, also known as The Weeknd, started in Toronto to sort of give creatives and young people there a platform to launch their creative careers. Lamar and Abel grew up in Toronto, and when they were starting their careers, they didn't have access to tools and mentors and studios. So they wanted to give the next generation that platform to grow on. And they reached out and asked if I could do a little presentation there. Rod was in attendance, and although the talk was geared specifically towards young designers, he felt that a lot of the ideas had relevance outside of that context, and asked if I could do that again here today. So we'll do a sort of condensed version. The topic is called what we call asymmetric design. And in this case, that doesn't mean things that are longer on the right side than the left side. That refers to asymmetry in the situation, or almost like guerrilla tactics. You've heard the term before in asymmetric warfare. It basically means a smaller force, a regular force, fighting against a larger regular force. So this is about that idea, because when you're starting out, or I think when you do something new or trying to break new ground, the thing that you realize right away, or the thing that we realize right away in our career, is that it's not a fair fight. The playing field is not level. All the odds are stacked against you. You're going to go up against entrenched systems who don't want to have anything to do with new ideas because it's the status quo. They lose when you win, and they know that, so they prevent you from progressing. And asymmetric design, as we see it, is a sort of tool set to sort of balance out some of those inequalities. Very simply, when you're in a competitive situation and you're fighting against an opponent who's larger than you are, you have to be smarter, faster, meaner. There's absolutely no other way around it, or you will lose. If there are two competitors of equal skill and equal size, that's one thing. But if two competitors of equal skill and one is larger, you're going to lose. It's very simple equation. So asymmetric design is what we know, because as Acronym, I'm sure most of you know the label we started. Basically took the ideas that we had seen in active sportswear, military, industrial, and wanted to use those technologies in sort of an everyday situation. This was a radical idea when we started, and was greeted with a lot of skepticism, and everyone we presented it to was like, why would you want to do that? We started in good faith, but had no idea how difficult it was actually going to be. And so these principles that I'm about to tell you now are sort of like the things we learned, and the hard way, basically. So by trying to do it the way everyone else did it, we realized that actually doesn't work. If you're doing something new, you have to get outside of the system. So asymmetric design is that. It's a tool set to do that. And it works best, or it is designed to work when you're not in a fair fight. first win, then fight. This is my 4-word summation of a very important, much more layered and detailed book called The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Definitely pick it up and read it. I got that for Christmas. My brother and I, who's here, received that from our parents when we were probably 13 and 15. I don't know. And I remember getting it and reading the entire thing in one sitting that day. Basically, it tells you to forget the usual notions you have about conflict, where you think about entering into a conflict, and you have 2 opponents and you slug it out. One of them wins. That's actually not what happens. So in the art of war, the idea is you defeat the opponent before you even fight. Or in the best case, you don't fight at all. So the fighting without fighting is actually the ultimate goal. And in our case, with asymmetric design, the idea is that you first win, then fight by finding the unfair advantage. So if you're going to enter into an unfair fight, you might as well use every tool you have and find what is your unfair advantage. And really what it means is like pick your battles carefully. You're going to be fighting an uphill battle. You're going to be outnumbered. If you can't win, don't play. The enemy's sword is also your sword. This concept is about 2 things, efficiency and mastery. It's impossible to find the unfair advantage if you don't know your enemy. So only by knowing your enemy can you really understand how you can defeat them. This is also right out of the Art of War, very, very simple concept. The other thing is about mastery, and that means taking what you have, about your competition, and using it against them. The thing we learn in apparel design is that when you're looking at existing products and you understand the production process, every single thing about the competitor, their entire ethos, their business structure, their design methodology is encoded into the garment. So an experienced person can walk up and take a jacket off the shelf and be like, I understand where the fabric is from, I can see where it's produced, I know how this went down. So when I'm talking to young designers, I often tell them, don't look at the design that the designer is trying to sell you. Look at the design as an artifact of the process that created it, right? And narrative is a big word that comes up all the time now. And people use mood boards. They're trying to create things around a story idea, and they present them in this way too. And you read them as a consumer, as a user, as an audience, and go along with the story. At Acronym, we're much more concerned with the meta-narrative, which is all of the things that went into the making of the story. And those things are also visible in the product. So you can learn by mastering your craft and understanding what you're looking at, exactly how your competition works and what they can do and what they cannot do. This is super important because if you're fighting an unfair fight, you need every advantage you can get. And by taking your competitors' resources and using against them, you're basically letting them do part of the work for you. Another example is what we call the post-market narrative, the after narrative. When we look at apparel designs that are vintage. So you find something in a military store, or you get in a garment that you've worked on, that somebody has owned for a while. We get customers who bring back their jackets. I've had this for 6 years. I've worn it every day. And can you repair it? We usually try to, in some cases, we try to actually just replace them with new garments, so we can have the old ones and see how the wear patterns develop. Like, oh, the elbow's too tight because it's worn out fast, or the person always had his keys in his right pocket, so there's a hole. You can learn so much more from these things, and that's another narrative that's encoded in the product. I once met Yoji Yamamoto in Berlin at a dinner, and talk about mastery. He was introduced to me at the dinner table in sort of like dark setting, like shitty lighting. And before shaking my hand, he reaches over and he puts his arm on my jacket, and he's like, feels it. He's like, looks at me, he goes, Japanese. And I'm like, Yes. And in the dark, with only his hands, he had determined that the jacket I was wearing, the nylon, was sourced from Japan. And it was, right? So really understanding the different types of narratives and craft can lead you to that form of mastery. And like, you don't want to go up against a person like that, right? So that's the goal. That's the goal. Another martial arts reference. I'm sorry, all of my metaphors are from martial arts, and I don't know what that says about me as a person. Art of War. And the other book that's really important to me is The Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi. He talks about the twofold gaze of perception and sight. And to me, that relates to the same thing. So seeing what's in front of you, but then also seeing what's in front of you, but also seeing what those things, the presence of those things being in front of you means. So looking beyond the obvious, right? So when I was talking to design kids, I'm always like, they're always showing me images that they use, they've sourced from Tumblr or whatever, they put together these mood boards. Like, when you design that way, I, as a experienced designer, I know when I see your product which Tumblr images you had, right? This is not a very inspiring thing to me, and doesn't really bring us any further, right? So, don't look at Tumblr, look through it, Like, what the image that you've got, what was the person thinking about when they made the garment that's in it, right? That's the interesting part. Which brings us to the next slide, your own game. So, the way to gain the unfair advantage is to play your own game. Playing someone else's game brings no advantage whatsoever, clearly. There's a reason that the phrase "the house always wins" is a thing, because they set the rules, they're going to win. That's how it is. The only way you can win in an unfair situation is you play your own game. And the only way you can play your own game is if you do what only you can do. So what I mean by that is Eric Hu is a graphic designer who he was at Nike, he just left. He had a really nice statement that he put on Twitter the other day. He said, "Good design gives more than it takes." Obviously, all of us work, standing on the shoulders of giants and all that. You use influences that you see in the world. You're basing your work on the work of others. That's human civilization and progress. But if you're actually going to design something that brings value to society and to the craft and to your métier, the thing I think you have to do is make sure that the things that you're taking from don't make them more the design than the thing that you bring yourself. So Eric's saying that good design gives more than it takes is a very simple, beautiful way to illustrate that. Looking at design and understanding how things get made and using the enemy's sword, all of that is about efficiency. And obviously one of the most efficient ways to do things when you're learning is copying, right? But copying is super dangerous because it doesn't give more than it takes. It just takes, right? And all of us know, you've all seen designs that just do that. And it's frustrating and it's a waste of time to me. And it's just boring, right? Let's be honest, right? The thing that I try to get design students to realize there is that while you can use it as a tool to learn how to do things, the thing is not to copy the result. The thing is actually copy the process, right? Look at the product, look at the design, and understand what did it take to make this thing that you love, maybe, or that's amazing, right? And don't copy that thing, right? But go through the process, try to reverse engineer. Okay, what did they do? How did they start? What were they looking at? What were their goals? Reverse engineer that, copy that process, but use your own situation, your own goals, your own tools, and you will end up with a different result. And that's the best way, in my opinion, to learn. And if you're able to do that and you're able to reflect your own situation, then you will eventually end up with your own message and your own game, right? Strike from the void. First of all, it just sounds cool. Number one, it sounds really cool. Another Miyamoto Musashi quote. To me, this really means not seeking validation. So striking from the void means applying the idea of playing your own game to the entire operation. So not just the design you're making, but also the business practices. Do what only you can do on a company level. Do what only you can do on a materials level. Even when we're looking at designing garments, we often ask the question, okay, we have a material, what can this material do that only this material can do? And try to express that. And by doing that, you end up in places that are unique and you discover new possibilities. This is a way to just keep things honest. It's also, you can also look at it as a way of determining fitness to purpose, right? And this is inherently valuable because it just cuts away all of the excess, right? And really that's what's equally important to playing your own game, is to not be tempted to play other people's games, because once you've chosen your path and you're moving down along it, there's always going to be distractions. There's always going to be people who are saying, oh, why aren't you doing this? Or why aren't you doing that? And I think there's just as much power in saying no, or more power in saying no than saying yes. At Acronym, we say no probably 9 out of 10 times. It's almost everything that people ask us. We almost never do it because it's taken us a long time to realize that if we play the game everyone else plays, we always lose. We're smaller. Our company is we specialize in a certain type of advanced technical outerwear. Our competition is hundreds of times, if not thousands of times larger than us. They have more resources on every front. But despite that, and despite us being now around for almost 2 decades, and despite the fact we know we're on every mood board in every company, and it's been like that for years. But other companies still can't do what we do. They still can't replicate it because they're copying the result. They're not copying the process, right? And when we work, we're always asking ourselves the question, like, how do we do this in a way that reflects our values? How do we make sure we're not falling into the trap that of following other people's rules or playing their game? Because in that situation, then it's size versus size, and we're always smaller, and we will always lose. So forget about everything else. Focus on your own methodology, your own system, your own path. There's actually a McLaren anecdote to that. I met Rob at the McLaren headquarters a couple of months ago, and he discussed to me, he's the head designer there, he runs the design team, and he mentioned to me how the designers are always sort of, trying to convince the engineers to do certain things. And fundamentally, the engineers are like, well, if it doesn't make the car go faster, take it off. This type of discussion, that's exactly what I'm talking about. So if what you're doing, if it's a design or a process or personnel decision, whatever it is, if it doesn't serve your game, if it doesn't serve your unique purpose, get rid of it. Even if everyone else does it, or especially if everyone else does it, don't be afraid to take those risks. Go out on that limb and do things that seem counterintuitive to everyone else or seem even damaging, actually. So the things that we do at Acronym that work for us the best are all things when I explain them to people, they're all like, you guys are crazy. That would never work, right? And we're still here, you know? Over time, those are the things that have worked for us and have proven themselves because they reflect what we can do, because people come back to it, and people come back to us because they can't get that from anyone else. Okay, measure twice, cut once. The goal of all of this is basically decisive victory. You want to be able to perform or deliver in your category in a way that is above and beyond what everyone else is doing. So while everyone else is playing A game, you come with B game and just short circuit everything they're working on. I always like to think about like cameras. You know, the number one selling camera in the world it's an iPhone camera, right? So how is anyone in the camera industry going to compete with that? You just can't, right? It's a completely different scenario. That type of thinking, that type of, I hate to use the word disruption, but that type of what is the word? That type of unorthodox delivery, unorthodox methodology, results focused, outside of the norm, that's what delivers long-term, defendable success, in my opinion. And if you are able to cultivate that in your practice, then you have a long-term, enduring, proprietary thing that you can deliver that can ensure your business or your practice is ongoing. And because Acronym is an apparel company, I will give you a small demonstration of what I mean by that. It's very loud. All right, so playing your own game really means trying to deliver something above and beyond what everyone else is doing. In our case, apparel design, looking at the smallest parts of the garment, so not even the silhouette or the overall design, but the smallest details that are common to everything. So pockets, zippers, hangers, all of these things. When we did our process, we followed this. We looked at every single aspect, and as a small example of what we came up with, I'll show you a demo. And all of this is to say now, the reason I think the asymmetric design can have value outside of just our practice is because all bets are off, right? The situation that we're all in globally, we need new futures. The business as usual is not delivering what we need. In the era of post-truth and environmental collapse and end-stage capitalism, whatever you want to call it, we're all at sort of like, everyone's an amateur now, right? The way the things have been made up until now doesn't apply. So, but all of those, in order to change that, we're talking about changing the entire system. So it's anytime you want to change something systemic, obviously it's a massive, massive challenge. So new methodologies are needed, and those methodologies are going to be going up against entrenched systems. And we all need all the help we can get. So that's my presentation. I hope you are able to use some of that and take your shot. Thank you very much.
So I thought we'd play a little conversation game to start out here. This is always interesting to learn more about the people behind these brands. So Yeah, I thought we'd step through your life in 10-year segments
Oh, really?
to see how you ended up where we are now.
I feel like I'm on a game show now.
Yeah. This is your life, Errolson Hugh.
Excellent.
Yeah. Let's jump to the 10-year-old Errolson Hugh. It's, can we say the year? 1982?
81.
81?
Yes.
Okay, 81. So where are you living?
God, where am I in 81?
Somewhere in Canada?
Somewhere in Canada. Is that Edmonton? I think it's Edmonton. 81? Yes. My brother Harlan is saying yes.
So how would you say you got from Edmonton to here?
I mean, thank God I did, yeah. Yeah, my mom always tells me a story that since I was about 7, I was talking about leaving Canada, actually. And I grew up in Vancouver, Winnipeg, and Edmonton. Pre-internet days, which I think is a very important thing to say. So there was no information of any kind. We were stuck out there.
So what were some of the things at this age you were interested in? Was the martial arts already there at that stage?
No, that was the first year. So I started when I was 10. Harlan would have been 8. And that was the key thing, karate at the YMCA. And that was key. I tell the story actually a lot. That was my first encounter with apparel on a sort of personal and sort of architectural level, where I realized that I could do things in my karate uniform that I couldn't do in my regular clothes. And then there was the beginning of my sort of lifelong quest to have pants that I could kick people in the head with, which I recently completed. But yeah, I used to drive my mom crazy in the change rooms, or both of us did, actually, because we'd always be trying things on and throwing kicks and freaking out the salespeople. But yes, so that was a key thing around 10. Yeah.
Do you think there are any other elements that were around at that time, like Shogun Warriors or Japanese anime as they were imported or anything like that?
There was no Japanese anime.
No. Shogun collection came later. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's jump ahead now. You're now 20 years old,
Right.
and let's look at where are you now? What are you doing?
20-year-old Errolson is in university in Toronto at Ryerson, and kind of at war with the world, hating everything. Yeah, I went to school in Toronto, had basically no money whatsoever, was in the fashion design program, and did not get along at all with any of the staff, any of the faculty that were there. Almost got expelled twice, for various reasons that we won't get into now. I was a horrible student. I was absolutely the worst student. Actually, you were at OCA at the time.
Yeah.
And I remember being at OCA, and one of his professors was like, "You, to me, you're never in class. What program are you in?" And I'm like, "I'm in fashion." He's like, "We don't have fashion." I'm like, "Yes, I'm at Ryerson." He's like, "What are you doing here all the time?" So they had better machines. They had cooler software and stuff. It's
Computers and cameras.
There were computers and cameras. It's much more exciting than scissors and stuff. I thought back then.
Why don't you talk us through some of the inspirations that you had floating around then, whether they're movies or music or any cultural elements that were informing?
Music and movies were definitely the formative ones there. Again, we're still like pre-internet, early days of internet. Like email would have sort of just happened then. So, and being in Canada, being in that environment, there just wasn't, I mean, fashion as we understand it now just wasn't available there. There was no access to it. So all the information that came in was through media, movies being a huge one. I remember actually being at OCA with you and somebody in the program, and then Rod was in the new media program, brought a VHS copy of Akira back from Japan.
That was a big moment.
That was a big moment, yeah, which we watched with no subtitles and not speaking Japanese. And all of us kind of like, what the hell? And then immediately rewound it and watched it again. That was our... Yeah.
So thinking back to that time, were you starting to form an image? Because I know that your life and your design work has a a very clear thesis when you're looking at it. It seems to be very directed and focused. But was that image forming in your mind's eye even then, of where you wanted to go and what you were seeing that you could build with a brand?
I think partially yes, because even if I look at my thesis collection from design school back then, there were similar elements. The other thing that would have happened there is because of the situation, how I was living, and sort of the extremeness of that. I guess contempt for things that don't work really, really came to the fore there. I was like, wow, I really hate that these shoes fell apart after 2 months of having them, or that I can't do everything in this one pair of pants. So that all definitely started there, particularly the freedom of movement. That was a huge thing also. That was still very much in the days of not having pants where I could kick people.
All right, let's jump ahead 10 more years.
Okay, 30 years old.
Where are you now? Where are you living?
30 years old. Then I've moved now to Munich in Germany, and am not fitting in at all. But have an amazing sort of studio that Michaela, who's my partner to this day, actually in Acronym, we founded it together. We had met in Toronto. Her family is from Munich, and after university was over, Canada was in a recession. So there was no, not even summer jobs. So she was like, I'm moving back to Europe. I was like, I've never been to Europe. And took off with my 700 Canadian dollars in savings, which is about 49 American cents. No, it's kind of. Yes, and I've already been, at 30 though, I've already been there for a while. Started a design practice, had done a whole slew of just designed everything we could get our hands on. You wanted swimwear, we do it. You wanted inline skates collection, snowboard collection, mountain biking, bikinis, whatever. We did it. Pay us, we'll draw something for you. And then had actually started thinking about Acronym as a specific project. Would have been probably 3 years before that, so 1999. We founded that company. And that was born out of frustration of working on all of those freelance things. And design always taking a back seat to all of the commercial requests that clients had. And so then with Acronym, our goal was to have an arena where we could do and execute design in a real way with absolutely no compromises. So the model we set up was then, and at 30, it would have just launched, actually. 2002, the first product ever would have come out, which was a box set. We couldn't afford to make an entire collection, so the idea we had was to take all of the ideas from a collection and put it into a single product. This was a box set, which is made it primarily of a jacket and a bag. The jacket is actually the one I just demonstrated. It's the same jacket, or not the same jacket, but no, it is the same jacket. There's nothing the same about it. Every single part's changed from then till now, but it's the same model and the same idea and the same format, basically. And even the bag that was included there is also still the best-selling bag that we make now. Right.
So let's jump ahead 10 more years. Acronym has now existed for, say, 10 years. What state is it in at this moment? You've been doing it for 10 years. How are you feeling about it?
2012.
Yeah. Has it become a religion for people at that stage, as it is now?
Yeah, it went from this early stage thing where no matter where you were in the world, if you saw someone wearing Acronym, you could walk up to them and go, "Hey, do you know Errolson?" And they'd be like, "Yeah." I had lunch with him the other day. Who are you? And then probably about 5 years after that, it went into the stage where it was just a very, very dedicated let's say, otaku sort of mentality, like customer had developed, who were like able to seek out and like locate Acronym, because there's still limited quantities of it, but it was extremely limited back then. And then I would say around 2012. So like I would say probably 3 or 4 years before that, I would guess that a good percentage of the clients that we had and the people who bought our stuff were other designers. So we had sort of like industry rep. And in 2008 or 9 probably, both Arc'teryx and Stone Island had reached out to us and asked us to do basically what we do with Acronym for them, using their tools and their methodology and their company infrastructure. So 2012 we had sort of achieved, I would call it critical success, or what's that even called? Like insider, like industry insider rep. Yeah.
So how has it progressed now for the past few years since then? It seems like it's on an arc now.
Yeah, I mean, it's still the case with it. The brand image is much larger than the actual brand itself. One of the big things that obviously that changed the profile of the brand was our collaborations, particularly with Nike. 2 of them in particular, we did footwear collabs, which went over really well. And then we did a project for them called ACG, which was like the Stone Island and Arc'teryx projects, sort of acronym for Nike. And a lot of people who are into it now first learned about what we do there. And those were great because they're much more accessible price-wise than Acronym itself. Acronym is stupidly expensive. There's just no, I mean, when I said that we wanted to make a company that had, that didn't have to compromise in design, we really actually did that. And there was never a discussion about, okay, what's the price point, or how should this be merchandised, or who's the customer, or, no commercial planning whatsoever. There's still no sales director to this day. There's still no merchandising to this day. We just make the best things we possibly can, and as a result of that, we end up with things like pants that are 1,400 euros, which if you talk to anyone in the industry is like, no, you really should not be able to do that. But that works for us. So, yeah.
Okay, so let's zoom out here, and I'm just curious would you say that there's a theme to your life's work right now, a purpose?
A theme?
Yeah, something that you feel in your bones that you're trying to get to.
It's probably resistance. That's probably the number one. That's what comes to mind right away. Resistance in terms of like just physical durability, even, but also much more on a philosophical level, as in resistance against industry norms or consumption norms, or what you should expect from a design or should expect from a piece of clothing. We like to challenge people's ideas of what things should be able to do and how they should be able to do them. So that's probably, yeah.
I've heard you say in the past that you had to explain what it is you're doing and what Acronym is, and that these days it seems like that explanation isn't as needed.
Yeah, that's changed dramatically over the years. Like I said at the beginning, people were just confused. They're just like, why would you do this? It's so hard. It's so expensive and complicated. And luckily, or whatever, for whatever reason, the industry sort of, rotated around and sort of legitimized all the work that we've been doing. So I would say probably 5 years ago that happened. And now people have understood what we've been doing, for almost 2 decades now. It suddenly became like a goal. And I think the reason that happened is because to a non-industry person, to just a person who just, I hate the term consumer, but a person who's actually using apparel, as a tool or as a way to express who they are, as their identity, fundamentally for what clothing is, like not fashion necessarily, but actually apparel. Everyone gets it immediately when I show them Acronym. If they're 16 or they're 60, they're like, oh, yeah, I could use that. I want that. Or I respect that. I can get behind it, And so the resistance was much more at an industry level. And that has definitely eroded over time. Yeah.
I've been interested in the word, maybe it sounds a bit corny, but the word superpowers.
Okay.
And I often ask my friends or people that I work with if they know what their superpower is.
Huh.
And if they can define it. Because my belief is that if you can figure out what that is, then you get a lot of momentum and things just start happening around you, sometimes exponentially. My sense of you is that you've always seemed to have known this.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What is it?
Would you say?
I don't know.
Maybe it's resistance.
Yeah, maybe it is resistance. Yeah. It'd be resistance, or probably the other one term that comes to mind is patience. Yeah. I'm just really good at waiting things out. Like, why are you laughing? Yeah, I'm really good at like if there's situations that are negative or situations where we're not going to do well in, I don't really stress out about them. I'm just like, all right, we'll just wait and see what happens. And more often than not, it works out. And if you can't do it now, you can do it later.
Well, what advice would you give to the young creatives or people that are just starting their careers out here about how to try to discover that purpose, or being able to look in the mirror to see that specialization, the thing that they're going to bring to their own game?
Yeah, that's really a lot about self-reflection. That's the only way to get there, is really to understand yourself. And this is no easy thing, for sure. I think even with us, with Acronym, it took us, I would say, 10 years of actually doing it before we understood it, Like a lot of people that when we first started and we presented the idea to, they had a much clearer idea of how difficult it was going to be than we did, because they could immediately see like, oh, this is not how the normal industry operates, or these ideas about product development or the longevity of the items that you're making is going to run counter to the the commercial interests of the entire industry and the way things get made and sold in apparel business. And they could identify that right away. We were too young and naive and didn't get it. So execution, practice, and self-reflection constantly. There's no shortcut, unfortunately, I don't think.
Let's talk about team culture and the team of Acronym and your role within it. Because as the company's grown, you've added staff and you've brought some people in who are quite young and they've developed and progressed. And why don't you talk us through how your role has shifted over the years of Acronym, to how you operate now to how you operated at the beginning and 10 years in, say?
Okay, that's really simple to explain, because for the first 8 or 10 years, Acronym was 2 people. And it was myself and my partner, Michaela, and we did everything. So designed the clothes, wrote the copy, packed the boxes, shipped, sent out the invoices, models the photos, took the photo, like literally everything. And the great thing about that was we learned every aspect of the business. There's nothing that happens in our company that we don't understand, because we've done all of it. But obviously that doesn't scale very well. So we've grown now. The design team in Berlin is now 10 people total. About 10 people, including me, I think now. Yeah. There's no interns. It's all just full-time staff. 2 people are freelance, I think. And obviously, yeah. So my job has shifted into now I'm, I guess, what you would normally call a manager. But anyone who knows me will know that like that's not a word you would use in relation to me. So, like, I'm like the worst. I always joke with my employees that like I'm the worst boss in the world. I'm a terrible manager. I show up last to the office. I get to the office at like 1:30, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and then kind of stumble around and not really useful until it gets dark usually. And try to answer everybody's questions while they're still around. Wait till everyone goes home, and then I work. Usually I'm just asking everyone like, what's going on? Like, what are we supposed to be doing? Who's this person who's coming for a meeting? And somehow they all tolerate it, and it works. I think the reason it does work, though, is because as chaotic as it is or unconventional, if you're able to operate in that type of an environment, not everybody is. The thing that's great about it is that you're able to take initiative yourself. You will be, even as a junior designer, someone who's just started, be handed super high profile, super difficult things to design. There's very, very little ego in the studio because we just don't have time. So everybody works ideally on everything. At the beginning, I was concerned that this was just because we were terribly organized, but as time went on, I realized this was actually a really good way of doing things because the cross-pollination happens very, very quickly. So oftentimes, our graphics guy will have great ideas for apparel, or our pattern maker will have some ideas about graphics, and this has turned out to be a huge strength, actually. So my job as now is actually trying to manage people, trying to deal with the external forces that the company has to deal with, meaning clients and production and deadlines and those types of things, and to mitigate those forces that distract the team from actually doing the work, designing, try to minimize that and try to get them to have as much time designing as possible.
Well, there's a question here that says, "Do you believe in 9 to 5?" Which I think you answered.
That's a no. Yeah.
But
that's a huge.
But it's an interesting thing. If you look at different types of creative industries, some studios, especially the big studios, they try and work on work-life balance, for example, right? People have families, etc.
Yep.
And I'm curious what your thoughts are, how work-life balance fits in if someone is dreaming of creating a brand in the future that's going to be on the level of what Acronym has found so far, or do you believe that that's just not possible? You can't put work into this 9 to 5 box, and a much greater level of commitment is needed. How do you see that fitting, especially with family life?
I mean, I don't know. I would never say like, well, number one, I would never recommend what I did to anyone else because it's so hardcore. But I would also never say that you can't do it that way. I mean, I couldn't have done it. I didn't do it that way. I had no work-life balance whatsoever. Still don't. But people that work in our studio, though, however, I mean, depending on, we let everybody work kind of the way they work best. So, like the pattern making team, they start super early in the morning. So they're there at sometimes 7:30, 8, and they leave the office at 4 or 5, because that's what works for them. Then it's up to me to like intercept them in like the 2 hours that I'm there, and they're there, and that overlap happens. But I mean, obviously, doing your own brand, being an entrepreneur, starting up a company, I haven't talked to anyone who said, "Oh, that's been easy." It's a full-on gig. It's not for everybody. But I think that's okay. I think it's like, if you're going to do something, we're in a world now where, do we really need more stuff? Do we really need another thing, another app, another whatever it is? If you're going to do that, I think it's important to realize it's going to be difficult. And if you believe in it, then commit to it. But understand that it is going to take probably everything you've got. And but I think that's good, because then you really focus on like asking tough questions, like, is this worth my life? And because that's what it comes down to, really.
All right. So are you fulfilled?
I would say yes. Yeah, absolutely. No, I would have quit way long ago.
Well, let's dive into that. When do you think you started to feel fulfilled? Because for a long part of the years I've known you, you've been feeling dissatisfied, maybe a little bit. So when do you think this feeling of fulfillment started, and what do you think it was?
Just to put this into context, I've known Rod. Our parents were friends, so I've known Rod since I was 1 and he was 2. So longer than my brother. Even. I would say I started feeling satisfied after I stopped caring what everyone else thought. Which also definitely had to do with starting my own brand. I don't think I would have achieved that if I hadn't done Acronym. That being said, Acronym didn't make financial sense for a very long time. And were many, many years where we were like, on paper, we're like, why are we doing this? It's so difficult. It doesn't bring any kind of real financial payoff. But we just decided we're doing it because we like it, and that's it. And because we don't have to listen to anyone else, and because we get to do exactly what we want to do. And there's definitely a huge level of satisfaction that comes from having that autonomy to determine, and that's probably the thing that I value most about Acronym still to this day, is the flexibility and the freedom, and the just the ability to do whatever ridiculous thing we come up with, we can execute, and often do.
Let's talk a little bit about streetwear, fashion, and collaborations.
Yep.
Not everyone here is from this world. Obviously, we've got hype beastie type people here, but is that the way to describe them?
Probably not.
Okay.
Sorry,
hypebeast. But first of all, can you talk through what the relation of Acronym as a brand is to streetwear?
Streetwear has become a pretty loaded term, but it's probably still the best one, actually, to describe Acronym. Acronym, when we started in 2000, we launched in 2002, and when we started working on 1999, we were working a lot with Burton Snowboards at the time, and through working with Burton Snowboards, we met a lot of people in the industry who became instrumental in sort of the launch of the brand, particularly Greg Dakishin, who's creative director of Burton at the time, introduced us to people like Hiroshi Fujiwara. Stash introduced us to tons of other people like Yopi, who was our distributor in Japan. He used to run a brand called Real Mad Hectic, and probably the first trip I made during that time was 2002, and that was sort of like the peak of, I guess, the Harajuku scene, which was an incredibly important, or turned out to be an incredibly important sort of era in streetwear. And everything that everyone understands now as streetwear is like the multi-billion-dollar enterprise that it is. In my opinion, originated from the Harajuku scene and from Stussy, those two things, and those are obviously also very related. Hiroshi being one of the original Stussy tribe members and friends with Sean Stussy to this day. So yeah, all of that going down definitely influenced the way we did things. I would say that's the first sort of set of people who were in the industry who didn't really care about growth. They were just like, we just want to be cool. Like, who cares if it sells? Like, we're just making this for ourselves and for our friends, and if you don't like it, don't buy it. That's it. That was kind of the thing there, and I think that's an incredibly valuable ethos, and that sort of countercultural idea or anti-mainstream approach to things that's for me fundamentally what streetwear is. And the DIY sort of punk aspect of it, and freeing yourself, I think, from those, commercial or strictly commercial aims really is liberating in terms of creativity, but also just like on a day-to-day like quality of life level, because you just, when you realize there's more to it than the money, it's way easier to enjoy the whole thing, the whole process. So.
I've heard you speak previously when we were out at Hype Fest in Brooklyn last year, and you did a seminar on collabs. Right. And it was very interesting for me, because I'm not from that world, to learn a bit about the history of collabs. Could you talk us through like a bit of the timeline? Yeah,
that's super interesting now, because like so many things from that time, it's become a global phenomenon. Like a collab, now everybody knows what a collab is, right? Two brands or two designers or two entities working on some new thing together has become very, very normal. But back in those days in Harajuku in Tokyo, it wasn't called a collab, and that had never been done before. But those guys, like, you had, Stash and Tet from Double Taps, they would do a T-shirt together. They would say Subwear, but the W was then the Double Taps logo. And the first time I saw that, that just blew me away. It was like, it's like having, a Chanel logo on a Giorgio Armani jacket or something, right? It's just like, it's just like, what is going on? Like, what? And they used to call it double label, because it was literally two labels on the same thing. And but why did it happen? It happened because all those guys actually were friends, right? They'd go skateboarding together. They went to the same schools together. They hung out. They played in the same band sometimes. So it was a super organic thing that happened. But it was really authentic, and you got these very, very sort of special results, right? That were never repeated. And people really, really gravitated towards that, and that idea, that concept of collaboration obviously became hugely influential. And now it's like, now in apparel or in fashion or streetwear, there's probably more collabs than non-collabs, right? Like most of the news is about collabs. It's crazy.
And what about Acronym's approach to collabs?
Acronym's approach to collabs is super specific again, because we get asked to do collabs all the time and have always for years. We say no like 99% of the time, because when people from the industry see Acronym, they just think, they just see now, it's like, this is the hot thing. It's a cool look. It's aesthetic. It's like exciting. Let's get some of that mojo and stick it on our stuff. And they don't realize how difficult it is, or how involved our process is to generate those results. So when we sit down and talk to them, even if we want to do it, which usually we don't, but even if we get to the stage where we actually decide, like, okay, we do actually want to work with you and do this, once we sit down with them, we're like, okay, this is what we want to do, and this is how we're going to do it. Most of them are just like, what? Maybe not. And they get scared and they run away, because it's the hard way, right? It's like every time we do it, we want to make sure we're doing something that we feel is on the level, that has a justifiable reason to exist, that isn't just about the money or about the fame or the whatever it is. We actually want to contribute something, and if you want to do that, you got to do the homework, and doing the homework takes time and costs money. So.
All right. Shall we change subjects?
Sure.
So maybe we really shouldn't be thinking about you as a designer, because that's...
Rather?
You're a viral sensation.
Oops. Okay. Here we go.
Have you guys seen...
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you want to talk us through, how did this start?
All right, so this is the bottle cap challenge.
I mean,
Whack.
you know.
Yes. That's my graphic designer, Ian, getting excited about the kick. So this happened a couple of months ago on the way to a lookbook photo shoot in the car. I had seen this guy, Farah Kicks, who's like a Taekwondo master in Kazakhstan. And he had posted, he was out for a walk with his girlfriend and had her hold up his drink and did a spinning back kick and kicked the bottle off. And I was like, yo, that's cool. I could probably do that. And then went to the studio and messing around. I was actually wearing these shoes the first time I tried it, which, as you can see, they don't have flat bottoms, so it didn't work the first time. And then, but then a couple hours later, I had other shoes on that had a flat sole and tried it again. And this was actually only the third take. It's not as difficult to do as it looks, but it does take some aiming. Like it's, you have to get the, you have to understand the angle of your foot. It's not like a regular kick. A regular kick, you're looking to like go through the target, and this one you're kind of looking to just kind of lightly brush past it. So you have to angle your foot a little bit differently. But yeah, did it and thought, oh, that's cool. Posted it, and went away and didn't think about it at all.
But you came up with this hashtag.
Oh yeah, so I thought Farah had actually tagged it, the bottle cap challenge. So I did too. Then I went to check, and he hadn't tagged it. I was like, oh well. And then I thought, okay, well, maybe we should change it, come up with something that sounds cooler. But then by the time I went back to check if we should change it, more people had looked at this one post that I had made than the previous 4 years of Instagram that I had done. And only like an hour and a half, 2 hours had passed. And I was like, oh, well. And then the other, sort of organic thing that happened was, in the true nature of a challenge, you're supposed to call someone else out to do it. So Ian was like, oh, let's pass this on to Max Holloway. Max Holloway is a UFC featherweight champion, and who I also started talking to on Instagram because he likes our shoes. So we sent him a bunch of stuff, and he wore it to some of his press conferences and stuff. So we were like, oh yeah, Max is great. Let's challenge him because he can probably do it. So Max then actually does it. This is maybe 2 days later, and Max has the idea to tag to challenge John Mayer. And what Max didn't know when he challenged John Mayer, though, is that John has actually done Krav Maga and a couple of other martial arts. So when Max tagged John, he's like, yo, and if you can't do it, you got to come hang out with me in Hawaii until you can. So kind of give him an out. But I knew he could do it. And then funny enough, I happened to be in Cologne. I went to the Hobbs and Shaw. It was like a trailer premiere, actually, right? At a comic convention there. And was with Jason, who stars in that movie, obviously. And we were in the car, and I was like, oh, look at this. This is hilarious. And showed it to him. And he was like, oh, damn, that's cool. I'm going to try that too. And then, yes, and then John actually challenged Jason. So in the space of like 2.5 to 3 days, we had, myself being in streetwear and then music, martial arts, movies. And that combination sort of then made it just take off. And it just became this crazy thing that went rogue and took over the whole world. So
Let's switch gears again. This is our final chapter here in this talk, but I think we should look at the mission that is growing with Acronym when we start looking at fast fashion, when we start looking at the role of consumerism. And can you talk to those points? Because you have a lot to say about these things.
I do have a lot to say about that. I could go on a rant about fast fashion for the next 2 hours, but I won't subject you to that. Fundamentally, Acronym is the total opposite of fast fashion. We're trying to make things that are as durable as possible, as timeless as possible. It's definitely about I on Twitter the other day, I made a post that said, not buying Acronym is actually way more Acronym than buying Acronym. and I actually, it sounds crazy, but I actually believe that's true because we have a lot of very devoted fans, and bless you all. But some of them, I think, one guy wrote to me once, and he's like, "Yo, what's up with the prices? I can't even buy 2 pieces a season anymore. It's so expensive." I'm like, dude, these are plus €1,000 items. Like, you're not supposed to buy one you're supposed to buy one and then keep it for 10 years. You're not supposed to buy 2 every season. That is not the idea. But, hype and design does crazy things to people. So, yeah. And I mean, what's the statistic? The average amount of times a piece of apparel is worn in the post-fast fashion world is 7. And then it goes in the incinerator to the secondhand or in the trash. And like, this is insane. I mean, this is literally destroying the planet. And apparel is like, it's the worst possible industry on all levels. It's the number 1 polluter behind like actual petrochemicals. The supply chain is horrendous. It's the biggest employer in the world because it's so distributed, but because it's the biggest employer in the world, it's also got the least oversight. More the likelihood of actual slavery in the supply chain is higher in apparel production than in any other industry in the world. And fast fashion, with its sort of downward spiral and race to the bottom in terms of price, basically exaggerates all those problems to levels that are just insane. And fast fashion must die. That's it.
What do you see as Acronym's role here? But what are you trying to showcase to people that want to purchase things and are used to buying and consuming and buying and have these habits? We obviously have to shift now, but what would your advice be?
I don't know if I have advice because it's such a complex issue. I would feel like I said before, it's a systemic thing. It's a huge issue that's going to take a long time and a lot of very, very smart people to figure out. But fundamentally, I think Acronym's like role or job in this case is to provide proof that it's possible to do it in another way. It's even on the very, very simple level of like retail distribution. When we distribute Acronym, the first thing we tell our retailers is, all right, we'll sell it to you, but you're never allowed to mark it down. You can't put this on sale at the end of the season. If you do, we cancel your account. You can't buy anymore. And at the beginning, there was a lot of resistance. They're like, geez, why? And for us, it was very simple. It's like, no, because why are you going to do that? Because we're not going to change the pant. It's going to be exactly the same pant that you order and gets delivered 6 months from now, and you'll have 2 of the same thing, and one will be 40% less than the other. And because of the way we approach the design, it's not worth less because it's 6 months old or 2 years old or 5 years old or 10 years old. But even just getting that idea across took years and years and years of constant policing. We still do. We still have to like make sure that our retailers don't have a promo code and don't include it in their Boxing Day sale or whatever. But now the majority of them understood this, like, no, it has the value it does, and it maintains it. And they're happy to be able to sell it at full price as well. Caveat being that they can't actually buy that much in the first place because Acronym just happens to be that difficult to make that we can't make a lot of it. So, Acronym, I think, is fundamentally now, in that respect, about illustrating that there are ways to do things that are completely counter to the norms of the industry, and that there are so even advantages in doing it in ways that are counter to the industry. So,
all right. So that's our chat.
Thank you.
Thank you, Errolson.
Thank you
Appreciate
for
it.
coming out, everybody.
A big thanks to McLaren for sponsoring this event, making this possible. And we also have some social media handles if anyone wants to follow these stories along. Maybe you'll come up with a new tag, new challenge.
Yes. The Night School Challenge.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thanks very much.